Nukes, drones, and robots. We're going to begin tonight with a talk by the iconic Dr. Helen Caldicott, who's gracing us with her presence tonight. Dr. Caldicott will speak about, among other things, the connection between the bombing of Hiroshima in 1945 and the ongoing crisis in Fukushima today. Of any two events in history, it is these two Japanese cataclysms that best spell out the need for total shutdown of nuclear power plants and total nuclear disarmament. Oh, speaking of disarmament, if you're as naive as me, you probably thought that with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the risk of nuclear war was practically obsolete. Well, last month, I don't know if you saw this, there was an article in the New York Times that said that the United States is actually expanding and modernizing its nuclear arsenal. I was shocked because the US policy is effectively reversing course on its long-standing agenda of disarmament in order to modernize an aging weapons system. The cost is going to be up to $1 trillion over the next 3 decades, according to a federal report. Even Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel has endorsed a military study that says we already have more than enough warheads in the stockpile to function as a deterrent. So I guess what it seems to be is that Congress is more interested in looking tough against Russia rather than in disarmament. And we're going to have Bruce Gagnon speak about the skewed and impractical priorities that our government is taking. Our historical fear of Russia has spawned not only nuclear bombs and atomic bombs, but also many other military innovations, if you want to call it that. As a matter of fact, if it wasn't for, of all things, the arms race with Russia, we wouldn't have iPads, Facebook, robot vacuum cleaners, Google Earth, Google Glass, and all these other digital technologies which were first developed during the Reagan Star Wars era. Now, as harmless or even empowering as these technologies might seem, it is their very digital quality that enables a level of totalitarian control to which military minds aspire. These technologies can combine with the expanded nuclear capabilities and create infinite potential for infinite permutations of evil. I'm reminded of my ex-husband now. No, his PhD in computer science was funded by the Pentagon so that he could develop a nuclear-powered robot tank that was operated remotely from halfway across the world, and if the enemy tried to strike the tank, it would retaliate by shooting off a nuclear weapon. So you have so many different layers of technology at work here. You've got GPS, robotics, nuclear, artificial intelligence, each layer further removing and virtualizing the human operator ever more from the reality of annihilation. It is absurd, it's even sick, to call this smart technology, yet this is the term that has been used very successfully, I might add, to market these products to the American people and the rest of the world. So the moral, political, and environmental implications of wars fought remotely is not something that's commonly talked about in the United States. Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention that Gar Smith is going to be speaking about robots and drones and the various killbots that are in use today. Now, what is talked about when we talk about robots and drones in war is how they eliminate casualties, American casualties. Now, this justification is chillingly reminiscent of when the atom bomb was first introduced to the American people. Harry Truman said that he was forced to drop those bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki because otherwise thousands of lives would be lost on the battlefield. He saved thousands of American lives. Well, it turns out that this was a lie. Japan had already offered several scenarios for surrender months before, all of which Truman totally ignored. He was determined to drop those bombs on Japan in order to show Russia, not Japan, that a post-war world would be ruled supremely by the United States. So, as the 50s came along, Eisenhower became president, the arms race with Russia ramped up, and the marketing of nukes also ramped up to the American people. The Pentagon was short of the plutonium, which was the central ingredient to making bombs that it needed to participate in the arms race with Russia. So Eisenhower's solution to the plutonium shortage was to promote nuclear power for the first time. Nuclear power produces as a byproduct the needed plutonium. So during Eisenhower's presidency, the number of warheads in the arsenal rose from about 1,000 to about 22,000. The name of his campaign, his marketing campaign for nuclear power was Atoms for Peace. Maybe you've heard of it in history books. So obviously this had way less to do with peace than it did with obfuscating the real agenda of a nuclear arms buildup. During the Atoms for Peace years, or the so-called Atoms for Peace years, 67 live atomic bombs were dropped on the Marshall Islands over the course of 12 years, the equivalent of 7,000 Hiroshima bombs. There were people living there. The Marshallese people agreed to the testing after a U.S. military official told them that it was, quote, for the good of mankind, end quote. Today, the exquisitely beautiful Marshallese Islands and their crystalline lagoons are unlivably and permanently contaminated with radioactivity. And today we have Nyson Locken is with us. She's from the Marshall Islands. She actually lived through these tests, and she'll talk about that in a few moments. So the Atoms for Peace years for the Marshallese and people like Nyson were nothing but an endless plague of illness, early deaths, birth defects that go on, passed on generation after generation after generation. So I'm going to wrap up because I'm really actually just the moderator, but I wanted to say that when we think about technology, let's think about why was it developed. These technologies were developed expressly for the purpose of controlling or ending life. And the spin-offs of these technologies are what we use today for all of our convenient mobile devices. So now let's hear from our speakers. They'll give us some more details on the real impacts to Earth and humanity.